Well, hello. It is the weekend, and it's time for our weekend Bible study. I hope that you have joined us today with an open heart and mind and an open Bible. We are going through the individual characteristics of the fruit of the Spirit. And, there's something about the fruit of the Spirit. It isn't a buffet. You don't get to go through the line and pick and choose which ones you want, which of these characteristics. I'll take some love and some joy, but I'm going to do away with the patience. I don't need that right now. Can't do it that way. If you have the Spirit, if you're a Christian, you should display the characteristics of the fruit of the Spirit, all of them. And so that's why we're studying these, trying to improve upon them in our lives. So we've covered a couple of them already. We've gotten to the one that we call patience, but I believe patience is probably not the word that we should use, but rather perseverance or endurance. I believe that's what he was talking about when he listed in the book of Galatians these individual characteristics. So let's talk about perseverance, endurance for just a few minutes today. When it's open, and I say that because right now pretty much everything is closed due to the quarantine, the coronavirus, stay-at-home orders. But when it's open, there's a fitness center that I go to on a regular basis to work out. And I hear that it's going to open up very soon, possibly in about a week, and I'm really looking forward to that. But when it's open, I go to the fitness center to work out. There are some similarities between physical training and spiritual training. Weightlifting, for example, has two approaches that athletes adopt when they're in training. Heavy weights lifted fewer times in succession produces greater strength. Lighter weights lifted with more repetition produces greater endurance. So if you want strength, you lift heavy weights. If you want endurance, you lift lighter weights more times. Well, when it comes to life, most of us can lift a heavy weight if we only have to do it once or twice. In other words, major problems that come and go away quickly, they're painful, they're no fun, we don't like them, but usually they're manageable. Well, for me, it's not the big problems that are the hardest. For me, the problems that are the toughest to overcome are the problems that just never seem to get solved. The ones that just pester you. They keep coming back time and time and time again. Well, the complexity of life can make our journey feel like the extreme obstacle courses and endurance runs that we see on TV. These games, whose competitors are people like us, they're a metaphor for life today. Life is an obstacle course. It has obstacles. We're going to have to endure. There's a verse in the Bible that never ceases to challenge me. Now, we're going to be mostly in the book of Hebrews today, and this passage that challenges me is in Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 36. It simply says, "You have need of endurance." When the fruit of the Spirit is listed with all its individual characteristics, patience is there, but I think endurance is more the word that he's after. You have need of endurance. Endurance is needed for godly living because few things about life are easy. While we shouldn't face each day with grim determination, we need something to carry us. Life requires a sustained determination to remain strong, to remain faithful, step by step, day by day. The most important thing a leader does is define his reality. So let me ask you, what's your reality? Are you battling stubborn illness or a physical weakness? Is your athletic career plagued by recurring injuries? Maybe your heart is broken over a relationship that's ended in disappointment. Maybe you're anxious about your children. Are you grappling with tension in the workplace? Are you exhausted? Working too hard? Maybe you've been victimized in a way that's left you traumatized. Well, Peter told the people of his day in 1 Peter 4 and verse 12, "Dear friends, Don't be surprised at the fiery trials you're going through, as if something strange were happening to you. In other words, expect them. They're coming. That's just the way life is. Trials and sufferings aren't unique to you. They're not unique to me. They're the common lot of all humanity. That exhortation that we talked about in Hebrews 10, that verse that challenges me, you have need of endurance. It states the theme of the entire book of Hebrews. We don't know the name of the author of Hebrews, but we have a powerful clue about its background. In chapter 10, the writer is identifying his audience. He's writing to people who have become Christians, Christians that didn't have to die for him earlier in their faith, but they had pressure, they had persecution. And that time of pressure and persecution subsided. And then things settled down. The persecution lessened. It became manageable. They became comfortable, maybe even complacent. And then one day their situation destabilized and the threat of persecution rose again like a tidal wave swelling and heading right toward them. Things grew more dangerous by the moment. The writer of the book of Hebrews alluded to this background story and exhorted his readers, Hebrews 10 and verse 32. Remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when you entered in a great conflict full of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. Well, then came those verses that I referred to earlier. You have need of endurance. You may not consider endurance one of your life skills. Not yet. But you will. You will need it. You'll have to develop it. The Bible's very clear about the way God teaches His children endurance. Adversity develops endurance. Endurance produces character. And people of character become people of hope. This is maturity in God's sight. When maturity reigns in your life, you have confidence. You have courage. Isn't this what we want to teach our children? Dr. Rachel Bryant is a clinical psychologist in New York. She published an article entitled, Children Learn When They Persevere. And she said this in that article, the power to persevere is one of the most important and yet hardest things to teach kids. Success requires ability. But ability is not enough. Many bright kids who sail through the early grades find themselves suddenly overwhelmed in 5th or 6th grade when the work requires much more effort. Whatever the task, building a tower, gluing a model airplane, or doing a page of math problems, first let your child know that you're pleased to see them trying, and with your presence, help them to stretch themselves just a few more minutes. At 15, American competitive swimmer Tate Ledecky, you remember her, gold medalist back in the Olympics, I think they were in London. She stunned the swimming world by winning the gold medal in the 800 meters. Ledecky's exceptional achievements can't be overstated. The world has many champions, but Ledecky stands out because of her margin of victory. She didn't just win, she blew them away. In fact, Michael J. Joyner, he's a researcher for the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He specializes in human performance and physiology. He says she's the greatest athlete in the world by far. She's dominating by the widest margin in international sport. How has Tate Ledecky become an enduring champion athlete? Well, more important to our point here, how does she keep it up year after year? Well, put simply, Ledecky's goal isn't to win and walk away. Gold medal in hand. That's not what she wants. Her goal is to always improve on her best and to continually break her own world records, and she's done it repeatedly. Well, like Tate Ledecky, we too can choose endurance. We can follow the coaching of the Son of Man and His apostles. We can follow a God-given training plan. We don't always know why life requires so much effort or why hardships arrive unexpectedly at our doorstep. Only eternity will reveal the purposes of some of our pain. Hebrews chapter 12 begins with the word therefore. And anytime you see the word therefore, you need to ask, what's it there for? Maybe you've heard someone say it this way. Whenever you see the word therefore, you should try to discover what it's there for. You usually discover the purpose of the therefore by looking backwards into the previous verses. So go back to Hebrews chapter 11, one of the most famous chapters in the entire Bible. It's sometimes called the Hall of Fame of the Bible, or more appropriately, the Hall of Faith. The people listed in Hebrews chapter 11, some of the greatest people of faith in history. So when the writer called these champions of faith witnesses, we need to understand what he meant. There are two kinds of witnesses. There are seeing witnesses and saying witnesses. When people observe an accident, we say that they witness the event. They see it. But that's not what Paul is pardon me, I said Paul. We don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews. We think it was Paul, but not sure. The author of Hebrews says, we have a great cloud of witnesses, but I don't think he's talking about the seeing witnesses. I think he's talking about the saying witnesses. These witnesses aren't witnessing to us as though they were leaning over the balcony of heaven and looking down at us. Allow yourself to be spurred to strength and endurance by the example of others, whether they're biblical characters or heroes in history. Now maybe you're thinking, I don't have any champions in my world. Well, you better think again. All the champions mentioned in Hebrews, they've been dead for centuries. But their story, what they are saying, is in your world if you have a copy of God's Word. Some people love to watch movies. Some love audiobooks. You look at these heroes of faith. Even though they're dead, they're still speaking through their written words and the record of their faith journey. I love to read. I surround myself with champions by reading the stories of men and women who fought the same battles that I'm fighting. And through perseverance and endurance, they won. It doesn't matter how you get your stories, film, TV, printed books. Fill your world with champions by taking in the stories of people that inspire you. Every man or woman with a gripping story has faced great adversity, and sometimes far beyond the seeming boundaries of human endurance. Some time ago, I read the biography of Eliezer ben Yehuda. Ben Yehuda devoted his life to the restoration of the Hebrew language to the Jewish people. They had almost lost it. When Ben Yehuda started to work on his dream, Hebrew was spoken only in religious context. But he lived to see the day when Hebrew was the language of the courts, the theater, society, public affairs. It had come back. It had made a resurgence. In the book, they called him a faithful fanatic. Well, when I finished reading the book, I felt a burning desire in my heart to be a faithful fanatic. The biblical story of the Apostle Paul rivals any modern biography. In his second letter to the Corinthian believers, he detailed what he endured to carry out his assignment. 2 Corinthians 11, beginning with verse 23, listen to just a few of the things that he went through. He said, I've been whipped times without number and faced death again and again. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and a day adrift at sea. I've traveled on many long journeys. I have faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I've faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. And he continues on with things that he went through. Oh, Paul knew what he was talking about when he wrote these words to his young protege Timothy, 2 Timothy 2 and verse 3. You therefore must endure hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. Well, like a swimmer or a runner preparing to compete. Let's strip off anything that weighs us down or slows our forward progress. That's what Hebrews says. Take it off. If anything is hindering you, if it's getting in the way, strip it off. And within the context of Hebrews 10, 11, and 12, that's chapters 10, 11, and 12, the greatest hindrance to the Christians was creeping unbelief. These believers had forgotten the power and the promises of Jesus Christ. They were thinking of reverting back to their old life to avoid the coming wave of persecution. Well, God gave us the book of Hebrews so we could examine ourselves. And whenever we get discouraged, when we recognize that unbelief is creeping in, confess it. Strip it away because it easily entangles us. That's what he says in Hebrews. The sin that so easily entangles, strip it off. Get rid of it. We all know from painful experience that unbelief erodes our confidence in God's ability to overrule our situation, and it sows the seeds of self-pity in our hearts. Self-pity is a particularly damaging form of unbelief. If you're feeling discouraged, enough to give up, ask yourself if self-pity has begun growing in your heart like mold in a damp basement. Sometimes what holds us back is a who, not a what. Sometimes it isn't unbelief, it's the crowd we're hanging out with. Why? Because relationships are fraught with emotion and with our own expectations. And we linger in unhealthy relationships for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's just force of habit. Sometimes it's convenience. Sometimes it's the fear of being alone, even a conviction that we are fixing them. Or maybe we stay for reasons we believe are good. We tell ourselves we're being loyal. Or we explain away the behavior because we understand why this person is the way he is or she is. Well, if your friend is holding you back, then you're paying a price you can't afford. It's profoundly difficult to move forward when somebody is just sucking the energy right out of you. When they're just sucking the positivity right out of you. You have to move on from those who are not champions, from those who are not striving to become champions. All of us struggle with this at some point in our lives. The circle of friends that truly sustains each of us really is quite small. And there's not room in that circle for everybody. Surround yourself with people who will lift you up or who want to work with you as you lift them up. Endurance. Oh boy, it requires a strong resolve. We have to make up our minds that we will not falter. We will not give up. The phrase, "let us," occurs 13 times in the book of Hebrews, and it speaks to our choices. Yes, God helps us, and we can never do it without His grace, but we have a role to play. We have a part too. Harriet Beecher Stowe, a deeply spiritual woman and the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, said, "When you get into a tight place and everything goes against you till it seems as though you couldn't hang on a minute longer, well, don't give up then, for that's just the place and time that the tide will turn." Grit is a book written by an amazing writer named Angela Duckworth. She says, drawing on her own painful story as the daughter of a scientist who frequently noted her lack of genius, Duckworth, now a celebrated researcher and professor, describes her early eye-opening stints in teaching and business consulting, which led to the hypothesis that what really drives success is not genius, but a unique combination of passion and long-term perseverance. She defined what it means to have grit as simply to be gritty, and then described it this way. To be gritty is to keep one foot in front of the other. To be gritty is to hold fast to an interesting and purposeful goal. To be gritty is to invest day after day, week after week in challenging practice. Angela shared dozens of stories about people who paid the price to be successful through determination and perseverance. And one of my favorites is about actor Will Smith. He explains his success in the entertainment industry like this. He says, "The only thing I see that is distinctly different about me is I'm not afraid to die on a treadmill. I will not be outworked, period. You might have more talent than me. You might be smarter than me. You might be all of those things. You got it on me in 9 different categories. But if we get on a treadmill together, there are 2 things. You're getting off first, number 1. Or I'm going to die, number 2. It's really that simple. Well, the Bible says we have to run with perseverance the race that is set before us. We must not give up. Many people have gone through periods of discouragement and weariness in their bodies and their souls. We all have. I know people who spent their whole lives preparing for retirement. Oh, they wanted to enjoy their retirement. They wanted it to be, their sunset years, traveling with their spouses and so on. And then it didn't happen. In some cases, disability or death intruded. In others, there were financial reversals. Well, like the Hebrews of the New Testament days, they were tempted to lose heart. Endurance, it takes anticipation. We have to focus on Jesus and the life that He offers us. We have to consider Him, and that will keep us from drooping. It'll keep us from discouragement. Jesus endured the cross because He anticipated the joy that would follow. And we have to fix our gaze upon Him. That's what the book of Hebrews says. We endure because He endured, and He endures still, both now and forever. Life requires endurance. But we don't have to persevere in our own strength or keep going on the sheer basis of willpower alone. We fix our eyes on Jesus, and we endure and we thrive because of His endurance. And we are, Colossians 1 and verse 11, we are strengthened with all might according to His glorious power for all patience and long-suffering with joy. In his famous book, Good to Great, Jim Collins told the story about a high school cross-country team that was very successful. And he's quoting some of the coaches from the coaching staff on that team. And he says, "Why are we so successful? We don't work any harder than other teams. What we do is simple. Why does it work?" Well, he's referring to the hedgehog concept of the program. And he's captured in this simple statement. He says, "We run best at the end. We run best at the end of the races. And we run best at the end of the season when it counts the most. Everything is geared to this simple idea. And the coaching staff knows how to create this effect better than any other team in the state. For example, we place a coach at the 2-mile mark, and that's of a 3.1-mile race. And they collect the data as the runners go past. And then the coaches calculate not how fast the runners are going, but how many competitors they pass at the end of the race. And they race with confidence. He says, we run best at the end. And that's what we want our runners to think. We run best at the end. So if I'm hurting bad, then my competitor must hurt a whole lot worse. We need to run as never before. We need to run with perseverance and endurance. We need to run to win. Romans 13 and verse 11. And do this, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awaken out of sleep. For now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. Endurance. Are you developing it? Are you letting the Spirit develop it in your life as part of His fruit? Next week, compassion. We'll see you then.